India's superpower dream is collapsing, and the cracks are no longer easy to hide. The headlines still talk about growth. The stock market surges, politicians promise prosperity, but behind the numbers lies a broken engine. 12 million Indians enter the workforce each year, but the jobs aren't there. AI is wiping out the ones that do exist, and the factories that were supposed to lift millions into the middle class, they were never built. India skipped industrialization and jumped straight into a services economy that serves the few, while hundreds of millions remain trapped in informal labor or total dependence on state handouts. This isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system. A top-heavy economy, a collapsed opportunity ladder, and a generation rising into stagnation. This is the story of a dream that was sold to the world and to India itself, and now it's breaking under its own weight. Let's start with what everybody sees. The surface numbers look incredible. India is the world's fourth largest economy. GDP growth has been clocking in between 6 and 8%. The kind of numbers that make investment bankers in New York salivate and economists in Brussels jealous. Rockets land on the moon's south pole. The stock market hits all-time highs. Global leaders line up to call India the next engine of the world's economy, a democratic counterweight to a declining China. And none of that is a lie, but none of it tells the whole truth either. Because underneath that shiny dashboard, there's a noise coming from the engine, a grinding structural noise that no amount of GDP gloss can drown out. Here's the number that should keep every Indian policymaker awake at night. Every single year, between 10 and 12 million young Indians enter the workforce. That's roughly the entire population of Belgium showing up at the factory gates each year saying, "We're ready, where's the work?" The economy doesn't have an answer. According to the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, arguably the most independent economic data source in the country, unemployment has been running significantly higher than official government figures suggest. The CMIE pegged the national rate at 9.2% in mid-2024, while government surveys showed something closer to 5%. That gap alone should raise alarms. But even those government numbers admit that youth unemployment for the 15 to 29-year-old age group sits around 14% nationally. Urban youth unemployment runs closer to 17%. And in some states, for educated young women, it rockets past 40%. In Kerala, female youth unemployment has hit 47%. And the real picture is even darker, because India's unemployment data hides something called disguised unemployment, where 5 people in a village do the work of 1. Simply because there's no factory, no office, no alternative for them. On paper, yeah, they're employed, but in reality, they're economically stranded. Now, here's where the numbers stop being abstract and start getting violent. In January of 2022, the Indian Railways announced roughly 35,000 job vacancies. It sounds reasonable, but 12.5 million people applied. That's one position for every 357 applicants. When the recruitment board changed the exam format at the last minute, the frustration detonated. Trains were set on fire in Bihar. Tracks were ripped apart. Police fired tear gas at thousands of young men who had spent years studying in tiny rooms for a shot at the lowest rung of the government ladder. These weren't radicals, they were desperate graduates. And it wasn't an isolated case. In Uttar Pradesh, over 93,000 people, many with engineering and postgraduate degrees, applied for 62 positions as peons, a messenger job that requires knowing how to ride a bicycle and make tea. When a nation's most educated youth are stampeding for the right to deliver paperwork, the GDP number, it becomes meaningless. So what's actually happening? Yes, the economy is growing, but it's growing in a way that creates value for shareholders without creating work for the masses. Capital-intensive industries, IT services, finance, automated manufacturing, expand the GDP without expanding the payroll. Economists call it jobless growth, and India has become the world's most extreme case study. But here's what makes India's version of this crisis uniquely dangerous, and we'll get to this later. It isn't that the jobs aren't being created. It's that the one escape hatch India built for its middle class is now being eaten alive by something that no one saw coming. We'll come back to that, but first we need to talk about the factory that was never built. For decades, the playbook of pulling hundreds of millions of people out of poverty has been the same. Industrialize. China did it, South Korea did it, Vietnam is doing it right now. You take farm laborers, you put them in factories, and within a generation, you build a middle class. India was supposed to follow this script. In 2014, the government launched Make in India with enormous fanfare. A mechanical lion made of gears and cogs, a promise to turn the country into the world's next manufacturing hub. The target was bold: raise manufacturing from about 16% of GDP to 25%. A decade later, according to World Bank data, manufacturing share of India's GDP has actually dropped to around 13%. The goal was 25. India didn't just miss, it went backward. And while India stalled, the competition sprinted. When multinational companies started pulling production out of China during the so-called China Plus One shift, they didn't all come to India. They went to Vietnam, they went to Bangladesh, they went to Mexico. Vietnam, a country with a fraction of India's population, now captures a larger share of global textile, leather, and footwear exports than India does. Between 2013 and 2022, India's share in these sectors dropped from 4.5 to 3.5%. Vietnam climbed to 5.9%, Bangladesh hit 5.1%, and India lost ground in the exact industries that were supposed to be its ticket to mass employment. The reasons aren't mysterious. In Vietnam, land is available, power is reliable, ports are efficient, and free trade agreements let goods flow with minimal friction. In India, land acquisition is a legal nightmare involving fragmented holdings and political conflict. Power supply is unreliable in many states. Logistics costs eat up to 14% of GDP. It's literally cheaper to ship a container from Shanghai to New York than from Mumbai to Delhi. And labor laws dating back to the British Raj make it nearly impossible to scale a workforce up or down, so companies stay small to avoid the regulatory trap. And then there's a tariff problem. Import duties, meant to encourage self-reliance under the Atmanirbhar Bharat banner, have backfired spectacularly. To build a made-in-India phone, you need screens from Korea, chips from Taiwan, and batteries from China. Slap a 20% tariff on those components, and the final product costs more to assemble in India than in Vietnam, where the same parts come in duty-free. The former Reserve Bank of India governor, Rajaram Rajan, pointed out something embarrassing. Most of India's celebrated mobile phone exports aren't really manufactured in India. They're just assembled. Components are imported, they're screwed together in a factory in Tamil Nadu and boxed up. The value added inside India is sometimes as low as 10%. India isn't the engineer, it's just the screwdriver. And the missing middle tells the whole story. India has giant conglomerates like Tata and Reliance at the top, and millions of tiny 5-person workshops at the bottom. What's missing are the massive mid-sized factories that employ thousands, the kind of factories that built China's middle class, that are right now building Vietnam's. In India, companies deliberately stay small to avoid tripping over regulatory thresholds. You hire more than 300 workers, and they need government permission to lay anyone off. So, entrepreneurs don't scale. They stay under the radar, and the mass employment factory floor never materializes. The Make in India campaign had an Oscar-worthy trailer, but the movie itself, it's stuck in development hell. By failing to capture the manufacturing wave, India skipped the only proven ladder for mass employment. You can't turn a farm laborer into a software engineer overnight, but you can put them on an assembly line in weeks. That option was never built at scale, and the consequences of that failure are cascading through the entire economy. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn, because the one sector that did work, the sector that gave India its global reputation, its middle class, its pride, is now facing a threat that could rewrite everything. For 30 years, the Indian IT services industry was the golden ticket. Companies like TCS, Infosys, and Wipro built a multi-billion-dollar empire on a simple value proposition: smart English-speaking graduates coding and providing customer support at a fraction of Western salaries. It powered a generation of upward mobility. It built gleaming campuses. It was India's one undeniable economic success story, and artificial intelligence is now coming straight for it. A landmark Stanford study published in 2025, analyzing millions of payroll records from ADP, found that entry-level employment in occupations most exposed to generative AI declined by 13% since late 2022. For software developers aged 22 to 25 specifically, unemployment dropped by nearly 20% from its peak. The very entry-level coding and customer service roles that form the backbone of Indian IT are the exact jobs that AI automates best. This isn't a future scenario. It's happening now. Hiring across India's major IT firms has dropped to historic lows. NASSCOM, the industry's own lobby group, has acknowledged the shift, framing AI as a workforce transformation opportunity, which is corporate speak for, your job, it's being replaced, and you better learn something new and fast. India built its middle class on being the world's back office. Now, the back office is being automated, and the country has no plan B at scale. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, hey, consider subscribing to Fall of Nations. We break down the global stories that actually matter, the ones behind the headlines. But the damage doesn't just stop at jobs, because even the wealth that does exist isn't reaching the people who need it the most. And the divide between those at the top and those at the bottom has become one of the most extreme on the planet. Here's the letter that defines modern India: K. One arm shoots upward, and the other, it crashes into the dirt. In 2023, Mercedes-Benz India recorded its highest ever sales. Lamborghinis are sold out. Luxury real estate projects in Gurgaon worth $1 billion sell out in 72 hours. The top 1% of Indians now own more than 40% of the country's total wealth. India has 284 billionaires whose combined fortune equals roughly 1/3 of the nation's GDP. Now, look at the other arm, the bottom 50%. About 700 million people own just 3%. Rural wages, adjusted for inflation, had been flat for years. Sales of entry-level two-wheelers and tractors, the real barometers of rural health, have stagnated or declined. FMCG companies have reported something chilling. Volume growth in rural areas has gone negative. Families and villages aren't cutting back on luxuries. They're cutting back on biscuits that cost 5 rupees, about 6 cents, the cheapest calorie you can buy in India, and people are downgrading even from that. And here's the psychological dimension that nobody talks about. Thanks to cheap 4G data, the Jio revolution, the poorest Indian farmer can now open Instagram and watch the Ambani wedding unfold in real time. He can see influencer lifestyles in Goa. He can see malls that he will never enter. In the past, poverty was often invisible to the poor themselves. Everyone around you was so poor, so you didn't know what you were missing. But now inequality is streaming in 4K resolution on a 6-inch screen. And it breeds a kind of resentment that historically hasn't ended well. And then there's the statistic that should end every argument about India being a superpower anytime soon. The government currently provides free food grains to about 800 million people. That's nearly 60% of the population. Politically, it's sold as a masterstroke of welfare. Ethnically, it's necessary to prevent starvation. But economically, it's a confession of failure. If the economy is truly booming, why do 800 million citizens need a government handout just to eat dinner? Meanwhile, the people who grow that food are dying. Agriculture still employs roughly 45 to 50% of India's workforce, but contributes only about 15 to 18% of GDP. Half the people fighting over less than 1/5 of the pie. The land itself has been fragmented across generations. What once was a viable 10-acre farm has been divided among sons and grandsons until plots are barely an acre. Too small for machinery, too small for profit, too small for survival. Farmers borrow from local moneylenders at crushing interest rates. They sell their harvest to politically connected middlemen who set the price and end the season deeper in debt than they started. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, 10,786 people involved in farming took their own lives in 2023. That's roughly 30 farmers dying by suicide every single day. Maharashtra alone accounted for 38.5% of those deaths, followed by Karnataka at 22.5%. A nation celebrating its status as an IT superpower that cannot keep the people who feed it alive. But then there's the other structural fracture underneath all of this, one that almost nobody discusses, and it might be the most dangerous of all. India's famous demographic dividend, the fact that its median age is just 28 years old, compared to China's 39 and Japan's 49, is supposed to be the ultimate strategic advantage, a young, energetic workforce that's ready to produce, consume, and drive decades of growth. But a demographic dividend only works if you have 3 things: quality education, quality healthcare, and quality jobs. India is failing on all 3. The education system has become a mass production factory for degrees that the market doesn't want. Employability reports estimate that more than 80% of Indian engineering graduates are unemployable in the knowledge economy. Polytechnic graduates, supposed to be the technical backbone of a manufacturing nation, show an employability rate of just 29%. Thousands of private colleges, many owned by politically connected operators, charge families their life savings for curricula that haven't been updated in over a decade. Some computer science programs were still teaching outdated languages, while the rest of the world moved to Python and machine learning. Students memorize textbooks to pass exams. They don't learn to solve problems, they just learn to regurgitate answers. Then comes graduation day. The gown, the scroll, the tears of pride from parents who sold family gold to fund the degree. And then the first interview, where a basic logic question just meets a blank stare. The degree was supposed to be a golden ticket, but it turned out to be counterfeit, and it bankrupted the family. Not just financially, but emotionally. India is producing a massive army of educated poor. Young people too qualified for manual labor and too unprepared for knowledge work. Stuck in a limbo that sociologists call waithood. Too old to be students and too unemployed to be adults. Millions of them sitting in tea stalls across North India, scrolling phones, studying for government exams that have been delayed for years, waiting for a life that never starts. And the window to fix any of this is closing fast. Demographers estimate India's population will begin aging rapidly by 2040 to 2050. The elderly population is projected to hit 20% of the total by mid-century. Over 40% of India's elderly are already in the poorest wealth bracket. India is on track to grow old before it gets rich. The Japan problem, but without the Japan wealth. There's also a geographic time bomb. Southern and western states, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, they've already controlled their birth rates and are aging fast. Northern states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are still growing. A looming delimitation exercise could strip political representation from the high-performing South and hand it to the populous but economically struggling North. Southern politicians are already floating phrases like the United States of South India. This isn't just an economic divide, it's an existential threat to the Indian Union itself. And while the youth search for jobs that don't exist, while farmers drown in debt, and while the middle class gets squeezed from both sides, well, there's a class of Indians playing by two completely different rules. Two conglomerates, Adani and Ambani, now touch nearly every sector of daily life. Ports, airports, refineries, telecom, media, retail, green energy. Walk through an average Indian's day, and you'll struggle to avoid their reach. The phone network is likely Jio. The cooking oil might be Adani Wilmar. The news channel could be Network 18. Their scale is enormous. Their political connections, undeniable. And the regulatory environment around them is designed less to encourage competition than to suffocate small players. An Observer Research Foundation study found that out of 69,233 compliance requirements for doing business in India, over 26,000 carry imprisonment clauses. An average mid-sized manufacturer with 150 employees faces 500 to 900 compliances a year. A mountain of paperwork, fees, and bribes that make staying small the rational choice. The judicial system offers no relief either. Over 4.8 crore casings pending, with commercial disputes averaging 4 years to resolve, if they're resolved at all. And the result? The successful are voting with their passports. According to the Henley Private Wealth Migration Report, India saw a net outflow of 4,300 high net worth individuals in 2024, with another 3,500 projected for 2025, taking an estimated $26 billion of personal wealth with them to Dubai, Singapore, and London. The very people who could invest and build and hire are choosing to leave. So where does this leave the India Rising story? India isn't collapsing. Let's be absolutely clear about that. This is a nation of extraordinary resilience, a country that survived colonization, partition, and famine, a civilization that has reinvented itself more times than most nations have existed. There is a genuine brilliance in its tech sector, real progress in digital infrastructure like UPI, and a geopolitical position that the world desperately needs as a counterweight in an increasingly unstable era. But resilience is not a strategy, and optimism is not a plan. The combination of jobless growth, a failed manufacturing transition, an education system producing certificates instead of skills, AI eroding the services ladder, and inequality so extreme that 800 million people need government grain while billionaires multiply. This isn't a speed bump on the road to superpower status. It's a structural fracture running through the foundation. India has roughly 20 years of demographic youth left before the aging curve bends irreversibly. 20 years to build the factories, to fix the schools, free the markets from regulatory strangleholds, and create the hundreds of millions of jobs that the demographic wave demands. 20 years, not 50, not a century, 20. If it doesn't, the dividend becomes a disaster. The dream of being a superpower will stay exactly that, a dream. And the world's largest democracy becomes a cautionary tale. A nation that had every ingredient for greatness, but simply never built the kitchen. The question isn't whether India has potential. Of course it does. Enormous, world-shaping potential. The question is whether potential alone has ever been enough. And history's answer to that question is brutal. So what do you think? Is the India story real, or is it an illusion already cracking under the surface? Are we watching a superpower rise or a giant stall? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into the stories the headlines won't tell you, subscribe to Fall of Nations. We don't just read the headlines here, we read the footnotes.